Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Gregor, Shrewd, Magistrate. So Gregor is a 3-mana Azorius commander. He's a 1/3 with Skulk. This creature can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. And whenever Gregor deals combat damage to a player, draw cards equal to its power. So clearly, we want to be able to pump Gregor and get his power as high as possible so that we can draw as many cards as possible. But there's a few complications in this. So first of all, when you think of pump, you probably think of green and red, and not Azorius. And it's true that pumping the power is not going to be as easy to do in our Azorius colors. But with that said, we don't need to pump them by too much, we just need to pump them by enough that it's worth the investment. And similarly, this Skulk ability very quickly becomes obsolete once we start pumping Gregor, so we're also going to need Evasion to make sure that Gregor can attack and actually hit our opponents. So with that said, let's start with the Beatdown. Now clearly we want to draw a bunch of cards off of Gregor, and that naturally leans towards a more Voltron strategy, so that is one of the things we're going to be doing. So we've got our pump like All That Glitters, Ethereal Armor, and Idolized as ways of pumping Gregor a whole bunch. Hero's Blade as another pretty good way. It's also nice that we can play this the turn before we play Gregor, then next turn play Gregor and it automatically attaches to him. And then we have Duelist's Heritage, Flaming Fist, and Battle Mastery, which are all auras that grant Double Strike, which not only will increase the amount of damage that Gregor does, but it also means that we get 2 separate instances of the Gregor trigger, so it's effectively like just doubling his power, really. And we're going to draw a whole bunch of cards. Also, Nerd Rage, ETB, draw 2, and then you have no maximum hand size, and whenever it attacks, if you have 10 or more cards in hand, it gets +10/+10. So obviously we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards. We would like to have no maximum hand size. We would also like to get the +10 off of this. It's also notable that hypothetically, if you had one of the double striking effects, you might be able to hit an opponent and then draw enough cards to get to 10 cards and then get the +10 on the second hit. Then we come down here for Evasion. So this is mainly as cheap as possible to get flying or some other unblockable ability. So we've got cards like Arcane Flight, Distortion Strike, Feather of Flight, Griff's Boon, Jump Scare. These are basically all just various ways of either pumping Gregor a lot or just cantripping, but either way, it's various modes of giving Gregor evasion and pumping him to some extent. Some are permanent, like Steel of the Godhead. Others are temporary, but give at least something like, +2 on Jump Scare, +2 on Wing It, +2 on Arrestor's Zeal. Distortion Strike will rebound and happen multiple times, or then we can have cards like Feather, Flight, and Arcane Flight, and Steel, which are only +1, but they're at least permanent effects. And Water Wings gives Hexproof, so it also doubles as a protective card. So aside from that, we have some regular old card draw as well, a bunch of counter spells, and in particular, the pitch spells are not really that much of an issue when we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards anyway. We've got a whole bunch of lands, and we are at more lands than I usually include, specifically because we're not going to be as reliant on our ramp spells. This is basically all just pretty straightforward stuff. Nothing much to see here, with the exception of Sarah's Sanctum as a way of getting a bunch of mana, since we do run a number of auras and other enchantments in our deck. We're also stretching the mana base to include a lot of lands that I probably wouldn't include normally, so things like Nimbus Maze or Tarnished Citadel, because we just need more lands than normal and as many duels as we can get. Then we're going to have a whole bunch of protection. We need to make sure that Gregor doesn't get countered or killed, and therefore we're going to play as much hexproofing and protection from colors and ward and indestructible and can't be countered as possible. And it's especially helpful if the card doubles as a pump spell or an evasion spell. So things like Blacksmith Skill or Come and Get It, which not only protect Gregor but also pump Gregor. Things like Sheltered by Ghost, which removes something, pumps Gregor, gives lifelink, and gives ward. And then, the moms, Giver, Mom, Spellskite, Skrelv, Pippin, those kinds of cards. And again, Misdirection, not so bad if we have to pitch a card because we're drawing a bunch of cards anyway. Also, a lot of our pumping of Gregor involves auras and things like that will go away if our opponents cast sweepers or removals, so we do want ways of protecting from that, which is where things like Indestructible or just straight up phasing come in handy. Then we also have cards that just straight up pump. So yes, we don't have things like Giant Growth and whatnot in Azorius, but we do have Behind the Mask, which makes the base power and toughness 4/3 for Gregor, or Relic's Roar, which does the same thing. We have a little bit of ramp, but we're mostly concerned with just curving. Turn 1, whatever. Turn 2, whatever. Turn 3, Gregor. Hopefully with some protection built up over those first 2 turns. So we don't need that many ramp spells. We also have some removal, a little bit of stacks. We basically have no ETB triggers, so Doorkeeper and Hushbringer are fine. And then, a little bit of adjacent cards, Psych Rift, Enlightened Tutor, things you would normally play. And you may notice out of all of this that we don't actually have any sort of big kill condition. There's no Thassa's Oracle, there's no giant Eldrazi creature, and that's because we mainly plan on winning just by making Gregor really, really big and shotting our opponents to death by a big Gregor. So that's where all of these really, really big pumps are going to come into play. All that glitters, our ethereal armors, our double striking cards. But with all that said, that is going to do it for Gregor, Shrewd Magistrate in EDH.